My name is Harry, and I'm 33 years old. I spent the past 8 years in a loving relationship with my ex-wife, Anita, who is now 30. For 5 of those years, we shared the vows of marriage, crafting a life filled with dreams and plans. Both of us had demanding jobs, which led us to delay having kids, but our future was always bright in our minds. We envisioned a home full of laughter, adventures, and love, a typical dream for a couple so deeply in love. Throughout our years together, we rarely disagreed on anything. Our aspirations and life goals seemed to be perfectly aligned. But everything began to change around February when Anita started a new job. That's when she met a coworker who, unbeknownst to me, would drastically alter the course of our lives together. After returning from a 2-week training, I noticed subtle yet significant changes in her demeanor. She was suddenly more distracted, often lost in her phone. I dismissed it at first, thinking it was just the excitement of a new position, but soon the realization dawned on me that she was frequently chatting with this new guy. I've never been the jealous type. I understood her industry was mostly male-dominated, and she often found herself surrounded by men. I had always trusted her completely and never questioned her loyalty. But as the days went by, I couldn't ignore the frequency of their interactions. In March, I brought up my concerns. I expressed how uncomfortable I felt about their growing closeness, and each time, Anita reassured me, claiming he was just a friend. She explained that they shared a Christian faith and often discussed the Bible, which made her feel comfortable confiding in him. She even offered to cut ties if it made me uncomfortable, but the nagging thought remained that they would be training together again at the end of the month. The idea of trying to control her interaction seemed futile, so I held my tongue. Even amidst my unease, I consistently checked in on Anita to ensure she was happy in our marriage. I'd ask if there was anything more I could do to strengthen our bond. I always received positive affirmations from her. Just weeks before, she had told me I was the best thing that had ever happened to her, which made the sudden changes all the more disconcerting. When she left for training in another location at the end of March, the first few days felt normal. We text regularly, share little snippets of our days, and I felt a glimmer of hope that everything would be okay. But as the week dragged on, everything began to unravel. Tensions rose between us, and we started fighting more than I ever remembered. I'll admit, some of it stemmed from my emotional turmoil. I was dealing with personal challenges that had me on edge, but there was something else in the air, an unspoken distance between us. Anita began expressing strange ideas about our future, thoughts that didn't sound like her at all. It filled me with dread. We had never argued about anything serious before. I couldn't even recall the last significant fight we'd had. Now, the tension in our conversations felt suffocating. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when everything started to change, but I felt it, an undercurrent of uncertainty that had woven itself into the fabric of our relationship. As the arguments intensified, Anita began to talk about needing space and time to think about our marriage and where it was headed. This was a phrase I had never expected to hear from her. She reassured me that she still loved me, but I sensed a shift. It felt as though she was trying to distance herself from me even further while still clinging to the idea of love. It struck me like a bolt of lightning that the core of our conflict was rooted in her interactions with this guy at work. I had seen enough to know that he was romantically interested in her. It wasn't just a friendship, there was something more. Her failure to maintain clear boundaries with him was painfully obvious, and it made my heart ache. I felt betrayed and scared, knowing that the woman I loved was slipping away. As the days turned into weeks, I tried to talk to her about it, but each attempt seemed to escalate into another argument. Anita was often defensive, and I felt like every conversation was an uphill battle. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing her, and the thought terrified me. I needed to reach her before it was too late, before this new guy in her life took her away from me completely. Every night, as I lay in bed, I wrestled with my thoughts. What could I do to salvage our marriage? I was determined not to lose the love of my life, the woman with whom I had built a future. I remembered the countless nights we spent dreaming together, the plans we had made for our lives. I wanted to remind her of that love, to reignite the spark we had once shared. Then came the turning point. One evening, after a particularly heated argument, I decided to write her a letter. I poured my heart onto the page, expressing my fears, my love for her, and my commitment to our marriage. I wanted her to understand that I was willing to work through this, to seek counseling or whatever it took to mend the cracks that had formed between us. I wanted her to know that I wasn't ready to give up on us. I slipped the letter under her door before she left for work the next day, hoping that my words would reach her in a way that I couldn't. That evening, when she returned, I was filled with anticipation and dread. I watched as she picked up the letter, her expression unreadable. After a moment of silence, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. It was the breakthrough we needed. She admitted she had been feeling overwhelmed and confused about our future and that her connection with this coworker had been more about seeking validation than anything else. She revealed her insecurities and how she felt lost in the whirlwind of her new job, and I could see the weight of her struggles reflected in her eyes. It wasn't just about him, it was about her own self-worth. In that moment, we began to rebuild our connection. We talked for hours, peeling back the layers of misunderstanding and hurt that had built up over the past weeks. It was raw and emotional, but it was also cathartic. We both realized that we had been drifting apart, but it didn't have to end that way. As we navigated this rocky terrain together, I saw glimmers of hope. We started to make plans again, exploring the idea of counseling, and talking about our dreams for the future. It wouldn't be easy, and I knew it would take time to heal, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like we were on the right path. Our love was still there, buried beneath the confusion and pain, waiting for us to rediscover it. As the days turned into weeks, I knew it wouldn't be a straight line to recovery. There would be challenges ahead, but I was determined to face them head-on. Together, we began to redefine our relationship, turning the page on a new chapter of love, understanding, and growth. And in that journey, I realized that love, while sometimes messy, can also be incredibly powerful if we're willing to fight for it. I was utterly bewildered, caught in a whirlwind of confusion, but I chose to respect Kat's request for space. I didn't fully understand what was happening, but I felt the tension hanging in the air. After a couple of days filled with uncertainty, she dropped the bombshell during a FaceTime call. She wanted a divorce. My heart plummeted as if the ground had been ripped from beneath my feet. In that moment, I still couldn't wrap my head around it all, but deep down, I sensed that she might be leaving me for that other guy. The emotional turmoil was overwhelming, a roller coaster of despair and doubt. Yet, I maintained my composure, clinging to the hope that this was just a rough patch we could navigate together. When Kat finally returned from her training, I drove to the airport, anticipation coursing through me. As soon as I spotted her, however, something felt profoundly off. She didn't even embrace me after being apart for weeks. Instead, she walked past me, her luggage trailing behind like a shadow. Once we got home, she made no effort to unpack. It was as if she was already emotionally detached. That night, when she looked me directly in the eyes, my heart raced in trepidation. "I want a divorce," she said flatly, her words piercing through the silence like a knife. "I don't love you anymore." It was an incredibly tough blow, a verbal slap that left me reeling. Despite the pain, I held on to a flicker of hope that our arguments and my emotional ups and downs were factors in her decision. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I worked hard enough, we could salvage our relationship. But the very next day, she surprised me with a sudden shift in her demeanor. "I want to clean the house," she declared, as if preparing for some kind of farewell. "I want to create nice memories for our last few days together." This sudden burst of energy felt bizarre to me, and I sensed something was profoundly wrong. Why the drastic change? What was she hiding? My intuition kicked in, and for the first time in 8 years, I found myself rummaging through her phone. What I discovered was gut-wrenching. Even before she came home, Kat had been in a relationship with that coworker, and they had even signed a lease to move in together. All of this had happened during the brief time she was away for training. I felt the walls closing in around me, suffocated by the weight of betrayal. She had told this man that she was willing to give up everything, our life together, our memories, to start fresh with him. It was a devastating revelation, and the sting of it left me feeling hollow and utterly lost. To this day, I feel terrible about invading her privacy. It's something I had never done before, and I felt like I had crossed an unforgivable line. Yet, at that moment, I couldn't help but screenshot their conversations, trying to hold on to some semblance of control while pretending nothing had changed. I wanted to see just how far Kat would go with her deceit. In the days that followed, I kept asking her questions about her relationship with this coworker, hoping for a moment of honesty, but I never got any truthful answers. Each conversation felt like a dance of avoidance, her answers twisting and turning like smoke in the air. Finally, one night, frustration bubbled to the surface. We were talking, and I could no longer contain my anger. I pressed her for the truth, demanding to know what was really going on. Instead of coming clean, she turned it around, blaming me for my own issues. "This is why we can never be together," she said, her voice laced with a mix of defensiveness and contempt. Even during our most heated arguments, she continued to lie, evading the truth with practiced ease. Eventually, she made the decision to leave that night. Watching her walk out the door, knowing it could be the last time I ever saw her, felt like a gut-wrenching loss. It was one of the hardest moments of my life, and I felt powerless. I kept asking her to be honest, to show some respect for the marriage we had built, but she just turned her back and walked away. As soon as she was gone, I felt a surge of clarity and rage. I sent her all the screenshots I had taken, declaring that I already knew everything. "I was testing you," I admitted. "I wanted to see how far you would go with your lies." Her response was even more infuriating. She claimed their relationship only began after she mentioned the divorce, arguing that it wasn't cheating. The audacity of her words stung like salt in an open wound. I was left standing there, reeling from the betrayal, feeling like the ground had been ripped from beneath my feet yet again. My mind raced with the memories of our life together, the laughter we shared, the dreams we built. Now, they felt like ghosts haunting the halls of our home. The trust I had placed in her was shattered, and I found myself grappling with the harsh reality that the woman I thought I knew had changed beyond recognition. As the silence of the empty house enveloped me, I realized I was not just mourning the loss of my marriage but the loss of the person I once believed Kat to be. She sat across from me, her eyes a mixture of sadness and resolve, as she shared the words I had dreaded hearing. "I've been wanting out of the marriage for a long time," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I've just been waiting for the right moment." The accusation that followed stung like a slap. She perceived me as controlling and abusive. After 7 wonderful years together, it was hard to comprehend how she could see our relationship through such a distorted lens. It left me grappling with confusion, my mind racing with questions that felt impossible to answer. In the days that followed her moving out, I felt like I was living in a nightmare. I could hardly process the swift changes in our lives. I hired a lawyer to file for divorce, a move that felt both necessary and devastating. Time was of the essence, and I couldn't afford to let her dictate the pace of this situation. To my surprise, she didn't want any of her belongings, none of the furniture, the cars, or even any financial support. She simply wanted to end things, to sever the ties that had once bound us. It wasn't a decision I had wanted to make, but I feared the uncertainty of what might come next if I didn't take action. Navigating the divorce process was like walking through a dense fog. I tried to remain strong, but each day brought a new wave of emotions. Anger, sadness, and betrayal washed over me, leaving me feeling drained. I wanted her to understand the pain she had inflicted, to grasp the hurt that lingered in the wake of her departure. So, I resolved to take matters into my own hands, without losing my dignity or stooping to her level. I collected evidence of her conversations with her coworker, proof of the affair that had shattered my heart and our marriage. With a mix of determination and frustration, I decided to send the screenshots to their boss. I hoped that exposing their actions would serve as a lesson, a reminder that actions have consequences, especially in a professional environment. As it turned out, my gamble paid off. The evidence was strong enough to get them both fired from the company, a vindication that felt bittersweet. It was against company policy for employees to engage in romantic relationships, especially ones that disrupted the workplace. I couldn't deny that a part of me reveled in the sense of justice, but I also felt a twinge of regret. I didn't want to ruin my own reputation or stoop to the level of petty revenge. Instead, I focused on finding closure. Months went by since that painful conversation when she first voiced her desire for a divorce, and as time passed, I gradually started to feel more like myself again. I found solace in the routines I built for myself, going to the gym, reconnecting with friends, and diving into new hobbies. One afternoon, out of the blue, she reached out to me, her voice tinged with desperation. She tried to beg for my forgiveness, explaining that she was struggling to find a job. "He's having second thoughts about us," she said, referring to the man she left me for, especially now that he lost his job because of what happened. Hearing her voice again stirred up a mixture of emotions within me, but I stood my ground. I reminded her that I didn't want anything to do with her anymore, that she was no longer my responsibility. If she thought I would swoop in to save her from her own choices, she was mistaken. I felt a strange sense of empowerment in my decision. I had to prioritize my own healing. During this time, I focused on rebuilding my life and becoming a better person. It wasn't easy. There were days when the memories of our shared past felt overwhelming. I found myself grappling with the idea of how quickly everything had changed. One moment, we were planning our future together, and the next, she was living with someone else, creating new memories that excluded me. It felt surreal, like a dream I couldn't wake up from. But I realized that dwelling on the past would only anchor me to a life I no longer wanted. I began to shift my focus toward the positive aspects of my life and the opportunities that lay ahead. I learned to embrace the uncertainty of the future and to find joy in the little things. Whether it was picking up a new hobby or spending time with friends, I sought to fill my life with experiences that made me happy. Slowly but surely, I came to terms with the fact that some things were beyond my control. I understood that I couldn't change her decisions or the path she chose. What I could do was create a brighter future for myself. I believed that, in time, I would heal from the hurt and rediscover happiness. With each passing day, I felt a little lighter, a little freer, as if the weight of the past was gradually lifting. As I moved forward, I embraced the idea that life was full of new adventures waiting for me. I started to envision a future that was not defined by betrayal or heartache, but by resilience and growth. I took small steps toward rebuilding my self-esteem, surrounding myself with supportive friends and exploring new possibilities. So, this is my story. Did I do the right thing? Looking back, I believe I did. I chose to prioritize my well-being and to learn from the pain rather than let it consume me. While the scars of betrayal may remain, I am determined to forge a new path, one filled with hope and the promise of better days ahead. I know that life is a journey, and I am ready to embrace whatever comes next.